Questioning Everything today with Adam Polansky, Principal Experience Architect at Bottle Rocket, one of the most humble servant leaders I've met. And he's not going to like talking about himself today, but we're going to do it anyway. I met Adam, I want to say almost 2 years ago now, at my first UX meetup. And he was the first man to give me a chance, pretty much take me under your wing for a minute here, and offer books, offer suggestions on how to find my niche in UX by reading certain books that would teach me about information architecture, research, and design. And I read those books, and I still haven't found what I want to do, but I did grow a lot from the mentorship. So I'm not really sure where to start unpacking here. Yeah, I don't have a question right now. There's not one. How are you? We'll start with that and go from there.
I'm doing well. I was thinking maybe you could go back to the books, and as you were going into those, anything come up along the way? Any questions or anything you've encountered since that it would have been nice to be able to ask about?
That's really good. I didn't have as much time to prepare for this interview as I usually do.
Okay.
Because I took my daughter to college today. That is it. It's still surreal. So let's see. I have the notes from the books that you had suggested. All right, so How to Make Sense of Any Mess, Abby Covert. That was my first one. Want to say you said Don't Make Me Think. Simple and Usable. And was it Living in Information?
Three.
Which one?
Nope, those three.
Those
I might have suggested Living in Information by Jorge Arango.
Yes. So when I read How to Make Sense of Any Mess, that spoke to me because I can take, as someone speaking to me, I can see a vision. I can distill all of these pieces and put something together almost at lightning speed. But then I have to come back and explain to people how I got from point A to point B. I don't know how I do it. My brain just works that way. I got in trouble in school a lot for that. Don't Make Me Think. I didn't get through all the way. I skimmed through it, but I did like the idea behind it is, I've heard this said before, people would rather die than to think for themselves. And as we design, we have to design in a way that's so intuitive they don't know it's design. And then Simple and Usable. So the only one I read all the way through is How to Make Sense of Any Mess, because everything just kind of took off from there. Started going to meetups, integrating myself in the community, and that one really stuck with me. I remember I had told you how the book made me feel, and you posted it on Twitter, and she replied, and that made me feel even better because I was brand new. I was still wet behind the ears, and to know that something I gave actually made someone feel. And now here I am down the line writing a book myself and thinking, just 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, I was thinking how far I am between the people I'm being mentored by and the possibilities that I didn't think were possible for me. I thought that there was all this stuff that was in between it, and it's just action and the belief that you can do it, and then solving a problem. Now, when I said servant leader, I see it all the time. You're all over LinkedIn giving speeches. There's always something going on where you're giving back. And it's not an expectation of pay. It's just to give back, because when you get to the top, to turn around and help somebody is the ultimate goal, and what gives you the most satisfaction. I'm finding that out for myself because of the way that you gave. I gave the same thing to everybody that I could once I like I passed on everything that you taught me every chance that I could. And I still try to just unload so much. That's why I'm writing the book, because I'm just repeating myself. And at that
Mhm.
point, might as well write a book and become an authority, right?
Mhm. I yeah, being an authority on something, I think happens a lot of times if, that's just based on years and paying attention. Um, but it suggests that you've reached the peak of knowledge, and that's never the case. Uh, I'm learning new stuff every day, and they're lessons that were put into play decades ago that didn't stick. In fact, yesterday, uh, a couple of things sort of connected that brought into focus something that I had been, or I should say, someone tried to teach me a long time ago, um, and not in any pedantic way. It was just how the person was, and
Yeah.
I was able to the realization that I had. I was able to connect back to the things I was learning from this guy.
Mm. Isn't that funny how that happens? Me and my wife were just talking about that. Your spouse, your mother, whoever can tell you the same thing over and over again. And then this complete stranger says it. And it's like, that's genius. And then you run and tell them, and they're like, I told you that. It's
That's a
almost,
different.
that's a different type.
That's different. I'm talking about times some years ago when I was working my first job in design, and I had an amazing mentor. In fact, I've done there's a presentation I've done about him in a few places. It's called Thanks Max, and it's about a guy named Max Wallace. And part of what that presentation is about is that I spent a lot of years thinking that I didn't make the best use of my time with him. And much later in life, as I was putting that story together, realized that as I was looking back at the things that he was trying to teach me back then, I realized that, I don't know, probably 75 to 80% of those lessons didn't stick until later.
Yeah.
And then realizing that he probably knew that. I wasn't going to all of a sudden do an about face and reconsider the direction of my life. But he just laid these things in. That was very much the kind of person that he was. He wasn't going to beat you over the head. He was not, bombastic or loud, but he just laid this information in there, and knowing that he, it's like cultivating. So that has a touchstone for me. Okay, that's what it's telling me.
So you froze for a second after you said he wasn't bombastic or loud. He just laid these things, and it
You're
was
reason too.
uh I just realized that. So the notes I was looking at were the distillation of, that was April 30th of 2019. So that was right after I got out of boot camp.
Okay.
The notes I were looking at was the distillation of all the books people gave me. But I have all the notes from when we talked April 27th, 2019, everything that you said that day. And I think the stuff that was in that meetup.
And I remember you mentioning you'd come out of the military. What branch?
Oh no, I wasn't in the military. Boot camp,
Oh,
UX boot
that's
camp.
right. The UX boot camp.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have, when you gave me those books, the question that you asked was which one lights you up, then tell you, and then tell you what my reflection is in regards for my career so far in the last 5 years. And then 5 years from now, what 3 things do you want in your life? What 3 ingredients do you want in your life? I imagine you've told a lot of people this. And then design is being able to go from a current situation to a desired situation. The distillation of all that we do into that sentence made sense. And then everything that I saw was gap analysis. Where are we? Where do we want to go? How do we bridge the gap?
Mhm.
And if you think of it from there, everything else falls in place. But we were talking about your mentor and the realization that you had. You said he wasn't bombastic or loud. He just laid principles out there. He kind of knew that it wasn't sinking in, but he was laying those seeds and they would eventually be watered and sprout up the fruit, essentially,
Yeah.
right?
And looking back, I don't know that he expected them to sink in. I don't think that. I think he knew exactly what he was doing.
Hmm.
He was just dropping a few things in there that when their time came, they would surface. And looking back, that's what happened. And it gave me, more than anything, it gave me a different sense of calm's not the word, but reconciliation maybe, because I really spent a lot of time thinking that if I'd had my shit together, I probably would have paid more attention. I would have made more use out of it, the couple of years that I spent with him. But I realized that my thinking on that and my belief in that was still all rooted back in that time. It was still all rooted back in what I did or didn't do in 1983 or 84. Now, some years later, I realize how all these things that he showed me and taught me expressed themselves in how I approached my work.
Mm.
And more than just my work, they really did. They really were woven into a lot of how I approach things, and still do, frankly. But it sort of took hindsight to pick that out. And when I could see that this wasn't a situation in a moment where he was holding it out there, and I either got the brass ring or I didn't. It was something very different. He was basically investing in me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing that, like any investment, the best realization of that happens over time. And so it really wiped away a lot of regret and guilt that I just left around for a while. Because I turned around and looked back and realized that, yeah, his fingerprints are all over this.
Yeah. As you talk about that, I think of just the fact that you were the first one I talked to. I clinged on to everything you said with a dying ear. And then I took all those notes in here. As I'm reading through the notes, I'm like, I see this in my work. And
Mm-hmm.
I know one thing you said was don't chase opportunities, chase relationships. And that changed the whole trajectory of how I was going to approach getting into UX, because I was looking for jobs and trying to prove myself. I want to say it's Mondo Frank talks about pie and how you can improve your career, but performance is this tiny sliver of the pie. Image is about this much, and the rest is exposure. And in a matter, I think it was from April when we met, April 27th, 2019, to whenever Big Design was, end of September, I had become the LinkedIn guy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any words for someone that's just coming in, looking for a mentor? I know you said you had this one. Did you have multiple along the journey? Was there? Okay.
Still do.
And do you recommend people to stick with mentors? And if so, do you think that giving feedback helps the relationship?
Absolutely. I think mentorship is, whether you're doing user experience or anything else, I think it is a substrate to to maturing.
Mm.
When we think of mentorship in sort of an older sense, it was usually specifically something people talked about with men.
Mm.
Oftentimes, when you looked at people in a career, they could always point to a particular relationship they had at one time with a particular person where they learned a bunch, and that sort of, you know, created this sort of critical mass for them that they were able to roll on with. I don't know that I see it that way. I don't know that I ever have, but looking back, that my time with Max was like exactly like that. But mentorship, I guess I never tried to put too fine a point on it, because mentorship can happen in a moment.
Yeah.
One person in a moment, something you pick up, and never anything else ever again from that person. But in that moment, you receive mentorship. I can think of a number of circumstances where that has happened.
Same.
Then, you know, there are mentorships that come out of a particular context or environment. You know, you can roll that all the way back to trades and guilds when you would go to work as a blacksmith or a glass blower, and you went through a period of starting at the bottom and learning all the fundamentals, the whole wax on, wax off of whatever it is you want to do. And over time, you know, you worked your way up, just like you do today in a lot of mechanical skills, you know, like electricians
Mm.
and other folks, where you go through an apprenticeship and a journeyman phase before you can be considered a master and you get your card. But that, I think, had a lot to do with the way information was passed around.
Yeah.
You had to be face to face with people to communicate with them, or pass letters.
Yes.
And if you take literacy out of the question, which is where a lot of people weren't, it really did leave direct, hands-on, face-to-face coordinated communication. Well, what happened over centuries is communication changed from two people sitting around talking to, you know, various ways of broadcasting and spreading one message to a lot of people, whether it was in print, later on newspaper, later on radio or telegraph, television, telephone, you know, and now here we are talking face to face. I've got a watch that lets me talk to somebody just like Dick Tracy.
Yes.
And the thing that struck me about all of this is I was doing putting a presentation together some time ago, was that I was looking at that sort of sequence of things and realized that all of our effort and all of the things that we're working so hard to try to achieve in these different methods of communication that have become so far flung and so broad, is to do everything we can to recreate as much as possible the feeling of two people sitting around talking.
You know what? And what better time to realize this and try to undo it than the pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, like that just blew my mind. You're right. We're trying to create a virtual version of what cannot be replaced. You cannot replace face-to-face communication, the feeling of the energy in the room, an embrace,
Mm-hmm.
a handshake. That can't be done here. You said a lot.
I can tell you that's the whole reason I'm in San Antonio right now. Is a friend of mine who is active in the UX community down here. They had a meetup last night, and about a month and a half ago, they asked me if I wouldn't mind doing a presentation. It was actually one I'd done before. However, it got a complete reboot in this case. So yeah, new added narrative because things have happened since then, and better graphics, a little tighter delivery. And first of all, I'd have done it anyway because of who she was. She'd asked, I'm in the car, but I also saw a chance to speak to something other than a screen.
Right. Yes.
And to get those things that you were just talking about, there is something intrinsic and non-specific about how energy moves between people. And when you're in a room and you're reading in the moment how people are responding to something you're talking or not responding to something you're talking about. I mean, if you're in a meeting, it becomes very hard to track those things. And I realized how much I relied on that in terms of how I try to build relationships in work. The video screen kind of puts a little bit of a mask over that, because people aren't always looking necessarily. They're not looking at you while you're talking. You're looking at a camera. I'm looking at a camera.
Right.
There are other things, that may be going on, or I might be. Here's a secret to anybody who I could be giving away the store here, but I have a lava lamp that sits just over the back of my computer, right? Kind of behind my camera. I didn't mean to do this, but it's just where it wound up. And I can bliss out on that thing. I could just sit there and be mesmerized by it still. And it's right behind my camera. And I'm sure people think I'm just paying attention and being attentive. And truthfully, I'm just watching my lava lamp.
You reminded me, I have these LED lights.
Yeah.
And you make a really good point here. So I just started at Quaint Studios, and Marriott's our main client. So that's who I'm working with right now. I thought the culture was a little weird because no one turned their cameras on ever. Yeah. And I just came from PayPal, where the designers were the only ones that turned their cameras on. And when the pandemic had first started, I felt like companies didn't trust us. So we needed to have our cameras on. That's when I was at Container Store. Everyone always had cameras on. So to see that shift as time has gone on, I know for me, I have ADHD. It is hard for me to focus as it is.
Join the club. We're having Jack at the mate.
All right. If I see the on Teams, the little circles with letters in it, people are talking about work stuff, you're taking the human element out of it when you take the cameras off. Beyond just the human element that's missing from being virtual. So that's double. And then you add the LED lights, the fact that we're at home, no one's watching what we're doing. And so I can be on my phone on Facebook, I can be on LinkedIn, I can be doing whatever I want, not paying attention. And then you lose someone and we end up having to redo work. So I want to say it was Wednesday. I remember one of the guys saying, so anybody have any plans for the weekend, anything fun? And it's crickets. And I'm waiting, thinking someone's going to answer, right? Nothing. And you can hear the shakiness in his voice. Like, he's very outgoing. He wants this. He needs this. It's almost like as extroverts, we crave that. And so I was like, I got something fun I'm doing this weekend. I'm going to go for a hike, because us creatives need that connection with nature, especially in this ecosystem, to get those breakthroughs and get this division from where we are here. And I said, on that note, can I ask a question? Because I've been here a month. Why do we not use cameras at Marriott? And you heard the laughter. And then cameras started coming on slowly. I turned mine on second. And as the cameras came on, the smiles were there. The conversation became human. The conversation flowed. People were commenting on stuff in the background. People had never seen each other before. And here I am a month at this company. I think I saw 3 people on camera, and those were my bosses. And that was in the very beginning. And then it was all no camera. So I had reported this to my boss, and she said she loved how I was bringing the positivity and trying to help shift the culture and get that moving. And ever since then, I just turned my camera on, and my Scrum team, we did that. And you just see the shift. Now, I love that you had talked about, you mentioned that your mentor had given you what he gave you at 83, 84 as I was entering the world. So you've seen a lot of the shift in not just this industry, but in the world. And I'm one of the last generations to see what it was like before cell phones, before the internet, when we still had tapes and 8 tracks and CDs, and now we can Shazam a song and it's on our phone instantly. It's just crazy. It was something I dreamed of. Like you said, I could talk to someone on my watch like Dick Tracy. The master apprentice, that's no longer a thing. You don't have to wait for someone to give you permission to do something anymore because of how fast information can spread. And when you really think about it, the pie, performance, image, exposure, it's so little about what you do and more about what you give, what you deliver, and that's all done through communication. I'm having this revelation here lately that it's all communication. We're in meetings. We take ideas from out of the ethereal and we bring them to life through ideas or through conversations, mapping out those words onto something and then bringing them to life. And it's really blowing my mind that it's that simple. Now, when you said you were doing presentations, I wanted to ask, I just started reading Nancy Duarte Resonate. And I've had it for a while. And I knew it was a picture book, so it would be an easy read. And I wanted to read it, but I was saving it for last after I read all the boring books because they're just words. And I just started reading it last night and I couldn't stop. And now I'm on fire about it. Do you use that same methodology when you do your presentations?
No. And that's not a knock on it. The tools you use, the approach you take to presentation and delivery is as much about what suits you as anything else. In fact, we were doing speaker workshops at South by Southwest a few years ago. It was myself and a guy named Dan Willis and another guy named Russ Unger. And Dan Brown was involved with this when it first got rolling. But at South by, somebody from Duarte was there.
Oh, wow.
Looking at what we were doing, because it was kind of interesting because we had together and at the same time, we had developed a number of ways to help speakers prepare, help them get ready, based on a lot of our own experience and the fact that, generally speaking, we're a group of folks that people think tell pretty good stories. And we all bring a little bit of something different to it. And we'll see sometimes that somebody isn't responding to one set of suggestions. And so whoever is seeing that response isn't happening will shift gears and say, you know what? I want you to go talk to Adam over here. Or I might say, you know what? I want you to go talk to Russ. Because the technique you take on for anything is really just about what suits you, what speaks to your strengths and the way you feel like you want to communicate. So somebody from Duarte was there because we were also talking to speakers who were going on in like an hour or two. And in a couple of different ways, we developed some track records of actually helping some conferences kind of up their game a little bit by giving them a place to do dry runs, tech checks, speak a little bit about what they're doing, eliminate tension. And I've been doing it for 12 years now with the information architecture community. And after that long, I can say that most of the time when I sit down with somebody, if we're in there for a half an hour, I will do, if that's the hour, we'll spend this much time on the talk and the mechanics, if even that much. Because sometimes people would come in there and their choreography and everything is so tightly wrapped that if I suggest anything else, their heads will explode. And I don't want that to happen.
Right.
And so you tell just about everybody who's coming in, you know what, if you don't change a single thing, you're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And that's true. Because just the fact that they got to kind of roll it out, hear their voice on a microphone, stand there and sort of loosen up means that they will do a better job when they go out the next, to do the presentation than they would have if they hadn't stopped by.
Right.
And all I did was hold the door so they could come in and do that. And the rest of it is spent cheerleading. Somewhere in between, there are some opportunities to offer critique, but it's usually because somebody has asked for that in advance. And that critique is developed around this dynamic of the fact that you're not going to tear somebody's presentation apart 2 hours before they get up on stage.
No.
So having let them sort of work around inside of it a little while, kind of get, the feeling of it, there's sort of a perception that I'll come up with says, here's a couple of things we could probably smooth out. We're just talking about some of the burrs maybe that we could smooth out. And I'm not talking about Toastmasters smooth out, so that you sound like, a game show host, but smooth out in terms of making delivery make a little more sense, being able to communicate an idea better, helping you bridge a couple of ideas a little more efficiently. But anyway, Duarte was there. Somebody from her company was there to learn more about this.
That's inspiring.
And there were some conversations, I think, about maybe partnerships, but that was right about the time too when South by was kind of taking a different turn, and we sort of collectively decided, you know what, because 2 years in a row we were getting to do this. We were about to go back for the third. Like, why? Because the bang for the buck, the number of people that we got to help, the amount of benefit that we're able to provide, just really the signal noise ratio just wasn't there the way it had been, the way it still is in some other environments. But the original question was about how, I guess your question was about, do I follow a particular method? And the answer was no. But then again, and there's so much information out there.
Yes.
So you really can try things on for size, and you really can try different recipes, different mixes, a little more different ratios of this and that. Scott Birkin has some fantastic books out there on the subject of presenting. From the point of view who's out there standing at the podium like anybody else who does this. I took it a little bit different direction when I started doing workshops about, I call it speaking to small rooms, when I realized that after a few years of helping in the conference circuit, that not everybody's going to go speak to 500 people or 1,000 people in a room. Moreover, they don't want to. They really have no desire to do that. It's not out of fear. It's just they don't see the utility in it.
Right.
But I did realize that just about everybody who's in our industry certainly is going to get up either now on a screen or before that, and hopefully at some point again, you'll be standing up at the end of a great big long table with a room full of A-type personalities in there, needing to communicate, as you said, needing to communicate something that is vitally important to how things are going to go forward. Almost everything you said, I thought, geez, if we could lay this out on paper, we could spend one day going one way on all of it. We could spend another day going the other way on all of it, because there are, flip sides to a lot of these things, and aren't necessarily good or bad, but they're just different dynamics. But the approach to presenting is really, sort of finding out what suits you. For me, I had a background in theater.
Oh, wow. I can see that.
And coming out of school, I spent one season with the community theater group. And there's a saying in acting that says, if you like to do anything half as much as acting, do it. So I also was realizing that I was just not quite ready to suffer for my craft, at least not that craft. at that point.
Yeah.
Poverty sucks. So I had some pretty good hand skills as an illustrator. I was able to, get work doing that with Max, and that was a unique circumstance. I would not have entered and won a bake off if I had gone to tried to go to work for Stan Richards back then or something. This was a unique situation where Max's classroom was his business, or his business was his classroom. He wanted to teach, which meant he took knuckleheads like me with a little bit of promise and a fairly and at least a workable attitude and a willingness to be taught, and hired us. And we did work. We were a business, but
Wow.
the business we did was done on the back of the learning we were there to receive. So it was for a lot of reasons, that was a unique time.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And so I was very comfortable being on stage. I was very comfortable being, standing up at the microphone, which is unusual, as like many people in our industry, I'm an introvert, which doesn't mean that I can't get up and talk about things, and it doesn't mean that I can't stand up in front of a great big room and work the room. But it just means that when I'm done, I'm going to go hide. I'm going to recharge away from everybody, or at least in a much more smaller, comfortable setting.
Right.
In other words, I don't feed on that. I don't feed on having to be around people and things like that, which is how they recharge. And yeah, it doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. It doesn't mean I don't get something from it. I absolutely do. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. And I'll share a little secret about presenters. Not a one of us out there who didn't have just a teeny tiny little bit of narcissism in them.
I can, yeah.
I definitely find times when I get a little more too enamored of the sound of my own voice, or too enamored with the showbiz of it. So there was the theater part. There was the fact that I'd gone into advertising, and I've been able to work in a unique space for a while and pick up a lot of great skills and a lot of great insight from really, really smart people. And then rolled around and did a whole bunch of weird things for many, many years, until I went to work for a company who had a little internet firm, and I was introduced to the CEO by my father, actually, who had hired him to do some work. And my dad was one of these guys who, he wouldn't know exactly what the benefit was going to be for something, but he would see the benefit. And he really wanted me to turn my attention toward technology. He knew what people would be doing with PCs decades before anybody had them. And this is the same guy who, when he got his first one, picked the mouse up, pointed it like a remote. And he was also responsible for other things in his professional life that proved that he was visionary. And so it was his interest in that caused him to connect us. And I went and met with a guy, and he asked me, I said, so what do you do? Because as far as I knew, the only thing I had to recommend me to be there was I could surf the internet at home. And so he sort of laid out on a whiteboard sort of how their process worked, how business came about, how it was qualified, and how it was executed upon. And looking at that construct, I just said, okay, so there's people selling stuff, and there's people who are or who want things built or have an idea for something. And there's people over here with the means and the technical ability, the engineers, the designers to make that happen.
Right.
Which was pretty much the same thing I had done in advertising. You sat down with clients and you talked through ideas and you captured them, and you you tried to express them in different ways until everybody saw something that they liked, and then a designer or a printer would take the things that came next while you thought everything through, while the risks involved in changing something were low. So I just saw that same construct. I said, okay, I'm right here in the middle. There's somebody out here catching them, and there's somebody out here serving them up, but somebody's got to do the work in the middle.
Yeah, you're bridging the gap.
And I do that. I worked for them for 2 years before two guys named Lou and Peter wrote a book with a polar bear on it, and I had a title. Prior to that, it was just a handy guy to have around. So that was a case of me being in the right place at the right time. So I was able to be standing there at the time when all the little boutiques started becoming big companies, and a lot of the things that are the bedrock for our practice were becoming characterized. And we were drawing from things that had gone before. We were looking at this new environment and new media, and thinking about how all it came together. And of course, the bottom fell out of that. And when it started coming back up again, I felt like it was a little more deliberate and a little less heady. The Billionaire Boys Clubs had sort of had their day, and now people were starting to think about these things a little more seriously. It wasn't magic. So I started working with this company and started, just doing what I always did. I broke out a sketch pad and did what we now call wireframes.
Yeah.
And picked up a lot of, obviously needed to pick up a lot of new technologies and skills along the way. But it's kind of what this conversation about Max is that I was talking about how sort of more things change, the more they stay the same. How the lessons I learned in an analog space are just as valuable and have just as much bearing meaning in a digital space. And if there's a point to that, it's that I am seeing a serious lack of literacy in folks who are coming into this space now, who seem to be giving the impression that the things that they're doing arrived with them, when they're actually standing on the shoulders of giants, and without acknowledging that. And so I guess what I would like to be able to do is with people now is to be able to take what they do and characterize what they do and talk about the good things they're doing, but extend those things back to their origins or inflection points that made what they're doing today possible.
Right.
Because, and this could be an entirely subjective, but I feel like when you feel better about what you do by understanding that there's a foundation there, that there's more to it than the sum of its parts. It's what any foundation provides. It's a bedrock. It's the knowledge that there were things going on well before you got here, and there are things that are going to go on when you're gone, and you may have contributed to those things in a great way. But it's a timeline. It's not a moment in time.
Yeah.
It's not a snapshot. And I guess to put a pin on that, I was having a conversation about this at a conference that I've been involved in for a very long time. And I was talking to a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Austin Govella, who has written a few books in our space and has edited some stuff for me about that very topic. We were sort of lamenting this fact that people didn't seem to have any sense of how history was informing what they did. And as if on cue, two younger ladies were sitting on a bench outside one of the conference rooms talking about having seen this chart in one of the sessions, and the chart was something called the elements of user experience, which is a pretty much cornerstone of a book written by a guy named Jesse James Garrett in same title, The Elements of User Experience. Really one of the first books that zeroed in our space, when all this got rolling. And so they were going on and on about this thing, and like they just discovered it, and like it was all brand new. And Austin and I were listening to them, and we were watching them, and just I guess he was smirking, and I was giving my really, because sitting right next to them on that same bench was Jesse James Garrett. Who was hearing all of this and looking at us like,
that had to be, I wish I could have been there. That sounds hilarious.
But it's like it was staged to make that point.
Right. You can't make this stuff up. It's the serendipity. Yeah. Now, you said,
and so I'm sorry. Did you want to take a different? Is there any directions we can go here?
No, I'm loving this story.
That goes back to when you understand the foundations of where you are, and you understand the contributors and the contributions where you are, and then you understand that there are places all over the world that are laboring away in the same space as you are and care about the same things and trying to work to achieve the same goals as you are, you gain courage. I used to, when I was the user experience director with a pretty good sized company, I had a moderately sized team, some of whom were new, but I was already heavily involved in the conferences and the meetups and all that kind of stuff, and I was pushing them to do it. I still do that with my colleagues. I'm like, you know what? There are things we're talking about here that we feel like we need to get involved in. Well, I'm guaranteed to you there are groups of people who are already talking about that and already reaching conclusions and already moving past that. So if that's where we want to be, then we need to be in those conversations.
Yes.
And at the same time, I wanted people to gain courage by understanding that there's more going on in this industry than there was inside their four walls. Because I think if you think this is the only game going is where you work, then you start to worry that there's nothing else out there. There's nothing else going on. If you found yourself with a little too much time on your hands, you'd have no place really to go or not even know how to approach it. But if you do know that there's a community out there, if you do know that you have advocates and allies and people who are pushing for the same good things in the world that you are, my belief was that if you knew that, you could come back to work and be more courageous about how you put those things forward and less likely to be shut down, which is a big problem in our industry. There is still a struggle between, and it's not just UX, it's the struggle between quality and business and time. Business and time cause pain at the beginning of projects.
Yes.
And the people who are running those projects are focused on the money and the time. Quality, therefore, seems like something, it winds up usually being the first thing on the curve because it's not causing pain right away. Now it's going to cause pain in biblical proportions later if you don't account for it, and you're not going to be able to just sprinkle it in.
Like
but even recently, I've run into situations where I've had a real hard time dealing with somebody in a product management role who was focusing on the biz speak and all of that, and was looking at my work as a box we just needed to check so that we can move on. I was really, there were some heated conversations about why I would not develop an artifact that was really cool looking without the data to support it. This person wanted the picture and was getting angry because I wouldn't just generate a picture. And I was getting angry because that's what that person expected me to do.
Yeah, and rightfully so.
And so people who have known me for many, many, many years saw somebody said, I haven't seen the show, but somebody said that they saw Led Tasso. In other words, the evil me, because I lost it. And people were like, who the hell is that? Wow. So that's still, something we have to struggle with.
Yes.
And when that's something that you're having to struggle with, sometimes those are battles you just aren't going to fight and you aren't going to win. And so you're not going to twist yourself into knots to turn yourself into whatever you think everybody needs you to be, because you're so scared to be out on the sidewalk. When you know there's more going on out there, there's other people doing your work, there's other companies who've got a better, more mature idea of what it is we need to try to accomplish for the real life human beings who use the stuff we build, then my hope is that people would be a little more courageous and stand by their points of view instead of rolling over, something that I got really good at in advertising for a long time. And these are not tried and true lessons. I mean, they're tried and true lessons, but they're not things that I learned 20 years ago.
Right.
These are things that have found reinforcement or have taken on a whole new level of clarity, even within the last year.
Isn't it amazing how that still happens? Like, you feel like you've made it, and it almost feels like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything.
Yeah.
I every time I think I've reached, like you said, it's not like it's the zenith of what you can learn. It's really just the tip of the iceberg.
I haven't thought I made it since I was 21. When I was working in an ad agency and I was dating models and shooting photographs and meeting at clubs that I didn't have to stand in line to get into, to look over contact sheets and work with and dealing with other creators. I thought I was all that in a bag of chips, man. And I just had no idea. And a number of things happened to put that all back in perspective for me. And I think that's the last time I ever thought I'd arrived. And if anything, I'm farther from that than I was then. Just because of paying attention to what's going on and keeping my eyes and ears open and being aware. Lifelong learning is it's not a punchline.
Right.
And it's fuel.
This has been amazing. Like, I love that the show is taking this turn where I don't have a script and we just kind of go with the flow, and the story that came out, the realization, I feel like it's cementing what you just realized and bringing out some more of the edges of it, helping it come into perspective. But you said that awareness and history are absolutely imperative if you want to be successful and make that impact that you can make. And then courage, it would take heart to learn about the history and to become aware. And that's exactly what courage was translated. I can't remember, I'm going to paraphrase here, but courage meant to act from the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have anything in there, where do you get the courage?
Right. Well, that presupposes that your heart is telling you what the right thing to do is.
That's really good. And
And I don't think that's true for a lot of folks.
no, and it may be, but the fear of, like you said, everyone wants to keep their job. Everyone wants
Mhm.
to keep the six-figure salary. So rolling over and making something pretty is what you do if you want to keep it. And I've never been the one to fit the mold or not become less lead tasso.
Yeah.
I am sandpaper and I was put here to be sandpaper and I embrace that because some people need to be smooth. And then there's some people that are sandpaper to me because
Mm.
my ego can get here and needs to be put in check again.
Yeah.
There's there's three questions I like to ask everyone.
Mhm.
And the first one is, do you have a mantra, quote, or saying that has inspired you or carried you along that's like not really favorite quote, but one that really changed you?
Mhm. I've had several over the years. They some of them come and gone. Um, One is what I heard once from a guy named Richard Saul Werman, who is notable as an architect, but also just sort of a intelligence generalist. He is also credited with coining the term information architecture.
Oh,
And it was within the context of how information and the rate of which it was, becoming prolific was going to require somebody to make sense of it. And that was when he first used that term. And I had the opportunity to meet him and sit at a table with him when they brought him a birthday cake, and he showed everybody how to cut angel food cake. But in his presentation, he was kind of a crank for the most part, but he did say one thing, which is our job is to create understanding. And when you're talking about communication, and when you're talking about all the different things we do, whether it is distilling something from one person so that another person can understand it, or conceptualizing something so that another person can understand it, or listening to a person provide you with a whole bunch of information that they don't really know yet how it goes together and want to, that you can then take that and hold it right back up for them so that they understand it. That phrase gave rise to the name of a company called the Understanding Group, who, and it's some of the same knuckleheads that we were all running around together about 20 years ago. But yeah, this is, and one of them in particular is very tightly involved with Richard Werman. That one is kind of stuck.
that is
Last few years, I have been, it's probably more of a reaction than anything else, but I was co-chairing a conference a few years ago, and my mantra there became make peace with it.
wow.
Which we actually have that on t-shirts for the co-chairs. But that was my response to circumstances that were driven by a lot of externalities over which you had no control. And there are some things you can control. But in order to get rolling with it, you're just going to have to make peace with whatever is, whatever parts are under your whatever burrs are under your saddle until unless they just bring everything to a standstill. If they can be accommodated, managed, or at least mitigated, make peace with it, move on. Doesn't mean you like it. It doesn't mean you support the idea. It just means that you've had to put it in perspective and press on.
See, that brings me back. So there's two things you said that brought some things up here. So Our job is to bring understanding. And you mentioned Toastmasters earlier. Now I'm a club president, close to being a distinguished Toastmaster, and I'm area director for Area 74 in Division G. So I'm involved in Toastmasters, and it's been about the same time that I've been in UX. So I want to say right after Big Design, I stumbled on Toastmasters. I didn't realize it's like you don't realize what you're learning until you look back. So our job is to bring understanding, and I've been learning to listen because I've never been a good listener. I always listen to respond and talked over people. The fact that you've been talking and I've not talked over you except for maybe 2 or 3 times is huge progress for me. But I
Because
learned
because I've been doing it longer than you, and I'm better at it. It wasn't that you weren't talking over me; it was just that I continued to talk over you. So it is the bane of my, it is a fact, but it is the bane of my existence. But I don't excuse it as just, hey, you know what, that's my pathology. But it's a fact of,
you have so much wisdom to give that if people aren't listening, they're missing golden nuggets. So when someone with the salt and pepper is speaking, I am listening. Now, Toastmasters, I didn't realize what I was learning through the third part of the meeting. So the meeting is structured in a pie as well. It's prepared speeches, impromptu speaking, and evaluation. I thought the evaluation was stupid until someone explained it. We listen to understand. We listen intently when we evaluate someone because we have to listen in order to give feedback. And then we've learned to give feedback in a way that it's not only accepted as constructive criticism, but it's actually welcome and transformative because it's structured in a way that it's all positive. So 3 things we loved about your speech, 2 things you can improve on, and 1 thing you did excellent. Now we're sandwiching the faults or where they messed up, but labeling them opportunities makes it, and sandwiching them between some good stuff makes it digestible and actionable.
There's a name for that.
What is the name for that?
It's from Design Critique, and sometimes it's called the shit sandwich. Start with something nice, get to the center of it, and then finish with something nice. I didn't coin that one, but my, and maybe you can correct me, but my take on Toastmasters is that it's very much like the difference between being really good at the things that Toastmasters is promoting is the same to me as becoming a very good technical musician.
So it's very structured rather than
experiential. And you're learning about, you've got everything characterized and codified, and you're talking about the way these things interact and how they all come together to provide a not just a thoughtful presentation, but a well-delivered presentation.
Yes.
So I don't knock delivery, obviously, because like I said, that's really one of the things I focus on. But it comes from more of my involvement in theater.
Yeah. And
where I plant my feet that is different, and I'm not alone in this, is you can be the most technically accomplished musician on the planet. But that doesn't mean that you have musicality.
Right.
There are musicians who are not technically great, but their performances are the stuff of legend because of how music and musicality created a direct conduit for them to express what is in them.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think
And
that,
in
go ahead, go ahead.
I was going to say in public speaking, it's the same thing. Toastmasters will teach you how to be a fantastic technician, and you need that. You obviously can't demonstration musicality if you don't know which your fret hand is and which your strumming hand is, right?
Right.
But and you have to reach a certain level of accomplishment for you to, as they say in jazz, have big ears so that you're not thinking about what you're doing with your hands, and you can be aware of what other musicians are doing or what's happening in the space, or thinking about where your head is while you're expressing that muscle memory, right?
Right. Right.
Speaking, it's the same thing. And I feel like I've seen much better presentations from people who were not as technically accomplished, but delivered something that was absolutely important to them, and maybe even exposed some vulnerability or something raw.
Mm.
And I felt like that had way more impact than a very professionally polished presentation. And so when I talk about polished on a presentation, it's, yeah, I'm trying to help, get rub some of the rough spots out, but I don't want to remove the texture.
Right. You don't want to remove the heart. And
Yeah.
see, I see both sides of it. So for an introvert that doesn't have that charisma, and I won't say introvert extrovert because it's not. There's introverts with charisma that are. It's just
Yeah, the
that's how you
charisma is not
recharge
the
your
product
battery.
of either one. Yeah.
Right. So the people that, let's just say the people that don't have the charisma to have that musicality and that conduit of what's in here to come out here naturally, it gives structure. For someone like me who just I never prepare. I would love to be able to prepare something, get it nice, and I have a month to work on it. But I'm the kind of guy that 5 minutes before my podcast, I'm looking at your LinkedIn or Facebook, thinking of what I can get. I pull out a few questions and I'm working on the project that I had a month to work on an hour before it's due. I've been thinking about it the whole time, but
Yeah.
the action is at the very end. I agree with both sides of this. I think that when I got into Toastmasters, my first impromptu speech answering a table topic, they were like, this guy's great. Best speaker. I know those are all for boost of morale, but it felt good to get the best speaker. And then all of a sudden I was shy and didn't want to speak because we're talking about structure, which is not something that's not comfortable for me. And so it turned me into worse before it made me better. And now I got so good at pausing and not using filler words that now I look like a really good speaker. And I don't feel like I've done anything different. I just stopped talking. The other thing that I wanted to touch on that you said make peace with it. That was the other. It reminds me, I've been in recovery for 15 years now. Actually, I just came up on 2 years sober. So I've been back and forth on the bandwagon. 2 years sober on August 10th. Make peace with it reminds me of page 417 in the big book. And acceptance is the answer to all my problems. As much as I try to dissect that and find another way to solve a problem, acceptance is the only way that a problem is en route to a solution. It's like if someone wants to play a victim, something outside of them has to change in order for them to change, which takes away their power. If a person, place, or thing needs to change before you can change, you have no power. As soon as you become the problem, though, acceptance, surrender, you become the solution as well, because now you have the power. Now you can change. That's what that brought me to when you said that.
So I'm curious now. I've known a lot of people over the years who've gone through 12-step programs, and obviously I don't have all the literature memorized, but this is something I've heard a lot. And hearing it now raises a question in my mind about context. So in the context of a 12-step program, you are laboring to regain your agency from something that you regain your agency that you've given away.
Yes.
And nothing else did that to you. Alcohol is an inanimate object.
Right.
But it enabled you to give that up.
Right.
And the purpose there is to try to gain that, is to help you find the way to gain that back.
Right.
However, what kind of took a little sprint through my brain when you were talking about that is probably based on a different context.
Okay.
If I think there's anything that I think has become more and more evident, is that acceptance as a means of moving forward has created some very long and deep and deeply entrenched belief systems to prevail at other people's expense. And acceptance is what, even by the acceptance by the people who've been paying that expense, has also let it go on. And that's where we've seen it in the past, and we're seeing it again. People who are saying this is absolutely not acceptable, even if everybody thinks it was or thought it was for the last 50, 200, 300 years. In and of itself, at face value, when you look at the pieces of it, if you're what they used to call or what they call in legal, a reasonable person,
Right.
you should look at these things and say, this is not acceptable. I will not accept this.
Yeah.
And that's where we get back to sandpaper. That's where we get back to saying, okay, now where are you? What can you do about it? And maybe you can't, but maybe you know people who can. And maybe it means going and talking to the people who are doing the worst. And by doing the worst, I mean perpetrating the worst.
Right. There
are in our city, there are some amazing examples of people doing just that. I'll give a shout out to Chonga Harris. I'm sorry, Chonga Higgins.
Chonga Higgins. Yes. I love the movement he's a part of right now. I tried to get, right before the pandemic, he had just published a little book that was the whole Dallas police movement. It's huge.
Yeah. And he walked straight into the belly of the beast.
He did.
To work with the people who were at the root of the problem.
That takes courage.
And and instead of standing on the other side of the fence and throwing rocks, he crossed the fence and came over and said, let me help.
So Teresa Wynn,
he's running for office again, by the way.
I'm gonna vote. So me, him, and Teresa Wynn had met up at, I want to say WeWork in Dallas, to do some logistics on that, and we were going to go do some ethnographic field studies. And I was still just trying to get experience back then, but when the pandemic hit, it kind of took a turn.
Just a sec.
It's all good.
Okay. So while I was tethered to my phone was about to poop out.
Good catch.
You were talking about you and Chonga and Teresa getting together.
Yeah, so we were just going to go out and do ethnographic field studies and go into the belly of the beast and find out, like, from the people dealing with it, what was happening, and then take it to different sides. And I was so excited about that. I was trying to round up people to go with us to do these surveys. So we were putting together the survey, what we should ask, what was the most important thing, and how to word it so that it was received well. I was really excited about. So I'm going to reach out to him now that you said that. And there's a question coming up that you'll probably end up mentioning it. But the next, this is a good segue. So in talking about the acceptance, and to touch on what you said, context. The context of this, and acceptance is the answer, the key to all our problems. It's for the alcoholic to accept life as it is and stop trying to run from it. So acceptance is not, it's not universal because it's subjective. There's an acceptance speech, there's accepting an offer, there's accepting things that are unacceptable. But this one was specifically in that context. Acceptance of it is what it is, basically. Make peace with it.
Well, and the Serenity prayer lays it all out there.
Yes.
Do change what you can, accept what you can't. But in some cases, I think nowadays there are things that, at least at face value, you would think, well, I can't make a difference in this. But that doesn't mean you should accept it.
Right. Now, on that note, where we were talking about that, it was a good segue because my favorite question is what is one question you think everyone should be asking themselves?
I have 100 things bouncing through my mind right now, and I've been banging a lot of drums on a lot of topics lately.
Hey, we can go with more than one. You've got more than one. Maybe what
trying
series?
to find something. I'm trying to find a way to put words to it that's kind of succinct.
Take your time.
I don't know if it's necessarily a question people should be asking themselves, and I suppose it could translate into one. But over time, we have gone from a belief in and an appreciation for substance to something that is much more superficial. And this sort of came back into focus for me recently. A colleague of ours named Tanya Snook, better known as Spider Girl on social media. She is, again, one of the top practitioners in our space, and she talked about this sort of kind of something we were talking about earlier, this desire, expectation for people in our space to develop the window dressing for things and to go in and do what she called UX theater, which is a brilliant characterization of what we end up doing. And there's, I can't put advertising. There's a little bit of showbiz in every presentation that you do. But the thing is, it was okay to lead with sizzle as long as there was a steak. But now it feels like, no, we just like the sizzle. We don't need the steak. And that has taken part in the fact that you have people who are using every fiber of their being to persist a belief system in the face of all evidence to the contrary. And so instead of expostulating on that for hours, I will recommend a book. colleague of ours named Dave Gray. And if you're in this space, you may know him from a book he wrote called Game Storming, which is basically a Sears catalog of discovery and communication exercises in gathering, making sense of information from people. He's got another book, though, called Liminal Thinking, Liminal Thinking. And he has a model that I was lucky enough to see him demonstrate in a presentation where he was live sketching.
Wow.
And he has been one of my unofficial mentors for a long time. And I like to, I've known him through our industry. And so our orbits have crossed a number of times, enough that I would call him a friend. And hopefully he'd say the same of me. He laid out this structure that I think, better than anything I've ever seen, doesn't just hold up that people have these bubbles of belief that they defend against all common sense, but he shows the structure of it. Not just they have it and they're stupid, but these are the things that contributed into the creation of that. And why then they will defend that tooth and nail, and why there are people who will allow things to come in and let that inform and change a belief.
Beliefs are some of the deepest rooted. When you have to change someone in something they believe, when someone told me that everything that I know is subject to revision, including the truth, that messed me up forever, because it made me question everything. Go ahead. Sorry.
When I was in the military, I had a senior NCO who that was his go-to line. Hey, dude, reality's only temporary. I still use that a lot. But to bring it back to the point is that I feel like we're seeing it now in this level of polarization that is being experienced, and we're seeing it in the way people have begun to choose up sides. I've seen it in myself, particularly where I live, finding myself wondering first and foremost which camp they're in, when I didn't used to care.
Right.
Wherever you sat on the political ideological spectrum was not a barrier to respecting and appreciating each other's company, respecting other people's points of view, respecting each other's points of view. Respect, I guess, is the question I would have people ask, is how can I show respect? And that's not subservience.
Right.
Is how can I show basic human respect to somebody who's done absolutely nothing to suggest that they're due anything else?
Wow. That has got to
And
be.
that's the difference. That's the difference between, in design critique, talking about the art and talking about the design and talking about the ideas that formed it, and staying away from critiquing the person.
Yes.
Those are slightly slicker ad hominem attacks, which are now fashionable, it seems. People aren't arguing issues. They are doing everything they can to attack anyone or anything that goes against what they think. there is no acceptance.
That's unacceptable.
Those are the things that I've had, well, with all the time I've had to sit at home and think and read the news, because I'm a news junkie. I've gotten a little better since January 2020. But that's I guess it all rolls back to substance again.
Yeah.
Respect is a function of substance. And because everybody's looking at the surface, and what I do isn't, if I say something that's bullshit, but I say it loud enough and long enough, and I convince enough other people to say it with me, then I guess that makes it true. No, there's no, truth is empirical. It's neutral. It is what it is. And now we have, maybe we can wrap up on this, but there's and I'm going to mangle this in paraphrasing, that there's a science fiction author by the name of Spider Robinson. And probably his most interesting property are a series of short stories in a book called Callahan's Cross Time Saloon. And against this setting of a handful of regulars in this bar, different people and stories are played out as people travel through this environment. Time travelers, aliens, all the things you would expect to hear in good science fiction. But there was one, and I can't remember the exact scenario, but it was somebody who was talking about essentially characterizing why things were so bad. And it was this kind of a read down to say that, and I'm probably not going to get all the pieces, and I'm going to mangle it, but something along the lines that ideas have been replaced by morals, and morals, no, I'm going the wrong way. Ethics have been replaced by morals. Morals have been replaced by opinions. And that is one of those moments where I read something and had to stop, put the book down, and say, damn, he nailed it. So yeah, now I'm going to have to go out and find that actual quote. I think it's more of a paragraph. I don't think it's nearly that succinct, but this is a guy who was about to basically end the world. And he felt crappy about it. And he was in Callahan's having a drink before he pulled the trigger. And the guys in the bar got him to talk about it.
Wow. And it's a sci-fi book.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't mean
sci-fi
that truth can't be in there.
Sci-fi has been one of the chief vehicles for holding up a mirror to society throughout history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Simpsons, Family Guy. Actually, I want to say, just beyond science fiction, theater in general. It's Dick Tracy, The Watch. It was a dream at one point. It was just drawn. And now here we are with a seamless, I remember your post about finally getting The Watch. I just got mine around the same time, and I thought,
yeah,
it's so beautiful. The things that it does, I lost 15 pounds in a matter of a month and a half from closing my rings. It's just amazing how far we've come, and that our industry has made these things possible.
Well, I think what I like about science fiction, and when I'm speaking to maybe a little more specifically, is that science fiction takes all of the thorniest issues, all of the issues that make everybody uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and is able to hold them up in ways that are
Palatable.
well, no, I was going to say in ways that are factual and or I should say pragmatic and unvarnished.
Oh, wow.
But the fact that we're talking about aliens and starships and societies on other planets that are playing out a scenario that's happening right here, but by making that other, it's okay to look at it, examine it, talk about it.
It's like living out a metaphor.
Yeah, and science fiction authors know that and have known that for a long time. And so they're able to, and of course everybody loves it because it's entertaining, and you got all the, you know, the fantastical elements of it, and the thoughts of what things could be. I mean, let's not forget that Jules Verne invented so many of the things we have today, just like Robert Heinlein did, setting aside the fact that he's insane, that he was an insanely misogynistic son of a bitch. But he did paint a picture of things that we have today that didn't exist anywhere before his books. But it does give us a vehicle to examine ourselves without the discomfort that everybody feels.
That's what I meant when I said palatable.
Yeah, and again, going to the way things that have seemed to, the way things seem to have moved is that there are people out there right now who are doing everything they possibly can to protect this ridiculous notion that people should have the freedom to be shitheads and know it, but not feel bad about it.
I hate that. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the offshoot is, the price paid by anybody else, as long as these people don't feel bad about what they're doing. And I'm going to stop right there. Otherwise, I'm going to start talking about pandemics and Second Amendment rights and all that other shit.
Thank you for coming on the show, Adam. The last question I have is, who are two people that have as much wisdom as you that you'd love to see me interview on the show?
Well, probably the first two people I run across in any circumstance, frankly. And in this case, you're sitting right across from me. My daughter's sitting right over here. And I listen to and read what you're talking about. And my daughter has, in ways, become my mentor. And so, like, I don't have to look far. And typically, I don't ever have to look far.
Wow.
So
I am, okay, you can't see it, but I'm blushing. I guess I'll be interviewing myself next and your daughter.
Well, I mean, yeah, I do mean it as a compliment, but I guess what I'm saying is that I can't even imagine holding myself up as a benchmark for general wisdom, because for anything I sound smart about and deliver my little bumper stickers and fortune cookies that are tweetable and quotable, there are 5 more things at which I absolutely suck and I'm completely obtuse about. So
aren't we all?
If it's a question of find 2 people smarter than you, that's okay. Well, who's around? So
I like that. That's
yeah, if you're looking for people to interview, let's have another conversation about that, because that's my other superpower. Is I got a pretty good Rolodex.
okay. Wow. This is probably, no, it's hands down my best interview. Humility in action here. Thank y'all for tuning in. We'll see y'all next time.
All right. Take care, buddy.